Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Saturday, July 10th, 2021, a special weekend recording of the pod. I am one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson, and joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Recording this one super early, so the news that breaks on Tuesday, we wouldn't have caught it anyway, probably, but we definitely won't be catching it today when, PlayStation finally announces that they've acquired Bluepoint or whatever.
The PS6 is out, yeah. And also joining me this week from down under, the Australian boy wonder, Jono Pech.
Hey all, how's it doing?
How you doing?
I'm great. Trevor got to be the Phoenix Sun, so I was wondering if I was going to get a similar NBA-themed introduction, but I'm the boy wonder, which maybe that's a Luka Doncic thing. I'll take it that way because I love that kid. So
sure.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. The problem is that we're both Bulls fans, so I couldn't... Yeah, it's tough.
It's fine.
So fuck you both for the last time the Suns made it to the finals then. Haha.
Yeah, absolutely. 30 years ago, I think now, right?
Rally the Valley, Suns in 4.
30 years. Yeah, the Suns are going to demolish the Bucks. But, well, it might even be done by the time you listen to this.
It could be, yeah. Game 3 is tomorrow, so,
yeah. But we are not talking about the NBA Finals, unfortunately. As much as that would be great.
I think that was your segue last week too.
I know. It's all in my mind right now. Obviously, it's finals time. Instead, we were talking all about Jono, who out here writing a video game. We'll just dive right into it. If you want to give a quick pitch first off, Jono, what's the game? What are you writing?
Yeah, so the game is Trigger Witch. It's available on Switch, Xbox, and PlayStation as of the end of July, so 28th and 29th for Switch. Right? Yeah, July, I should say. It's a game developed by Rainbite, a 3-man studio down in New Zealand, who I became friends with from covering their first game, Reverie, and got the opportunity to work on this game with them as a contractor, which has been just amazing. Mostly with the dialogue and the writing side of things, but also did some sound design with all the cool sound effects. But it's basically a twin-stick shooter in an open world. Think like A Link to the Past if it had guns and it was a twin-stick shooter and lots of blood, pixelated blood. So that's the elevator pitch, and I think it's very narrative-driven, a lot more so than Zelda, I would say, and therefore it's better than A Link to the Past. No, I'm just kidding.
There you go. All right.
But no, I think people are really going to like it because I am super biased, but I think it's a really fantastic game. So
I saw you already platinumed it. Yeah,
I did. I was the first in the world to gain that platinum trophy, so pretty stoked about that. That's the perks of being, I guess, a play tester for your own game. But I think it's only 3 weeks now, so it won't be long till people can get their hands on it. Especially if they're doing reviews, it'll only be probably 2 weeks till those codes start dropping.
How easy is the platinum?
Yeah, so
there's no missables.
Yeah.
So that's a big tick, and I got to write the trophy list, so. There's a lot of trophies. There's like 57 trophies.
I saw, and I know the Rainbite team had done this on Reverie as well. I saw they did like a breakdown on PSN profiles of here's all the trophies and where the names came from, what the references are.
Yeah. Almost everyone is some kind of pop culture reference, which is always, I think, fun when people get them.
Yeah,
and it's a pretty simple list. Like in terms of, I don't think any of them will stump people. The collectibles will probably be the most time consuming, but the majority of them will just come naturally in the course of playing. And then there's a few fun ones that people might not realize exist until they either pop or they look at the trophy lists, just kind of gameplay related ones. And certainly there's like the story progression ones and for unlocking weapons and using the weapons in a certain way, kind of like inspired by some of those Uncharted trophies where it's like, set 20 enemies on fire or knock 10 enemies off the ledge, that kind of thing. So it's a good mix of challenges and just narrative based progression. But yeah, it's a great trophy list, and I hope people will platinum it in droves.
So yeah, I think we can start with what led to you kind of either reaching out to the Trigger Witch team or them reaching out to you to kind of bring you on board as a contractor to kind of help out on the narrative side of things?
Sure. So I got to know the team through interviewing them on putting in work for their first game, because I really liked Reverie. It's another like Legend of Zelda, but basically set in modern day New Zealand with a lot of Māori folklore, indigenous stories and history and that kind of thing. So that was a cool little game. Got to talk to them, and then became really good friends with Jared, who's like the lead programmer over there. And we played a bunch of games together. I guess he knew that I'd written a couple of novels, and because I've been working in that kind of creative space for the past few years, games has just naturally been something that I really want to get into, because, you know, as much as I enjoyed writing those books, it's, you know, games are really where my passion lies and where I could see myself working, because it's just such a cool collaboration between sound and music and art and writing and all these things that I love to see come together. So that's kind of what's so cool about games compared to novels. But, you know, for people that haven't studied game development at university or done like any traineeships or any of these things, it's always like, how do you get in? Like, how do you, you know, pitch something? And having that connection to those guys and them being such a small team, they didn't have the person as a part of the studio that had that skill that I have in writing and editing and that kind of thing. So it started with me just offering to edit the script for their next game, because Reverie had probably a bit closer to like a Legend of Zelda level of dialogue, where it's not like these long cutscenes and that kind of thing. It's more just like, oh, you know, you need to go over here and you need to talk to this person, and I've got a new item and now I can unlock the door, or whatever it is. Like, it was that bit more basic, and talking to NPCs, and the NPCs might have some quips and that kind of stuff. So I really just offered to do the editing, and it was, I think before they released their first trailer with like the kind of funny showcase, or just after that, they said, how would you feel about actually writing the whole script? Because this has a bit more nuance to the story. And I was like, heck yes, get me on. Like, this is my foot in the door. And for a long time, it was like I had made that offer to edit the game for a while, so I knew that I would probably have, you know, a tiny, like, little, maybe like a finger in the door. But then when they said that I could write the script, that was really like the moment that I was like, okay, now I can get working, crack my knuckles, and be putting my imprint on what I think is a really amazing game. And the premise of the game was there, as in terms of like the concept of the story and some of the lore and the big twist in the game. But it was up to me to kind of connect all the dots and build out that world into something, and kind of make everything that they decided make sense, because a lot of it was these big picture ideas. Even like the concept of the game, you've got like it's a fantasy world, but there's guns. We'll work out the rest later. So it was up to me to kind of flesh that out and not have people just scratch their heads about how does that work, I guess.
Sure. What were you'd say the major kind of inspirations, either from prior games or other media, or just kind of, again, talking about how their first games kind of pulled from a lot of indigenous kind of mythology, was anything in this game that you pulled from specifically?
So being the fantasy setting, there's a lot of drawing on, I guess, tropes that we love from those worlds, whether it is like a Zelda or a Lord of the Rings or a Harry Potter or that kind of thing. So I like messing around with the stereotypes of those games, whether it's things about witches and wizards and warlocks, and, you know, what's the difference between a wizard and a witch, or what's the difference between a wizard and a warlock, or a sorceress and an enchantress, you know. And then as far as like the games, like the writing inspiration, definitely like Final Fantasy VII being one of my favorite games was something where I really enjoyed the way that, you know, you're playing as this protagonist, but then you have these friends that are along for the ride, and they kind of each have their own story happening at the same time. and I like that. I like that there's different missions that you do, or different like areas of the map where now you get to learn about their backstory, or now you get to like see them come full circle. So that was something that I wanted to bring in as well in this game with some of the main characters' friends. And as far as the tone, I definitely, there's parts of the game that's serious, and there's, I guess, some allegory in there that could be unpacked, but it doesn't have to be. And on, running underneath that, I think because it's such a absurd concept, Trigger Witch, it's like Zelda with guns, I guess. I thought it had to have some humor in there as well. So the classic like LucasArts style games were always a big influence on me as well. So there's a bit of like Monkey Island thrown in there, or Grim Fandango, some of that kind of Tim Schafer style of tongue-in-cheek conversations. So it really, there is, if you know what's being referenced or like inspired by, you can definitely see like DNA of the games that I love in there too.
Very nice. Yeah, Trevor, you're the resident Final Fantasy fan here at That Nerdy Site. You're more of a 6 guy as opposed to a 7, I suppose, but still.
I mean, that like the good thing about that era of Final Fantasy is a lot of what Jono was talking about, of like the cast of characters is what drives things, even if like the plot is maybe lacking or, weird and outlandish and stuff. So I can appreciate that in 7 or 6 or, even 8 and 9 and stuff. One of the questions I had is, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, of Rainbite brought you in with an idea for the game, and then you kind of have fleshed that out. How did that process differ from obviously like the Spy and the Maven Effect being your kind of like full creations that you kind of had, entire ownership on? What was it like coming into somebody else's idea and really kind of building something from that?
I actually really liked it because I don't know if you had this experience at school, but if you were given a writing assignment and it was like just very open-ended, sometimes it would be difficult to know where to start. It's like, okay, what am I going to do here? But when someone says write a story about going on an adventure, or if someone says write a story about what you did on the weekend, suddenly it was like, okay, and you just start writing straight away. So it had that kind of effect on me where it was like, okay, this is the story, this is the main character, this is the antagonist, and this is the big twist and the concept. So it was almost like the dots were there to connect, and then I had to connect them and color it in and make it work. So it was quite freeing, really. And at the same time, because that was the approach to it, there were things that I couldn't change that I might have wanted to, or that I wasn't completely sure about. But because I had that freedom to get creative with it, I could almost, this isn't like saying the analogy that I make is a positive one, so don't think about it as any negative on like what Rainbite did before I got there. But if you take like a kid's drawing and it's like, okay, it's a dog, I guess, but then you see someone could come along and like draw over it and do some amazing shading, or they might like do an amazing background and turn it into like a really cool like work of art, and you go, okay, I can still see what was there originally, but it's complete, and it's something that I can like put in a frame, not just on the fridge. And that's not to say that that, like I said, that's not anything negative about Rainbite, because the idea that they came to me with was really cool and is very much still what the game is. But yeah, it's really cool now for me to look at it and go like, and try to remember like what was their idea and what was mine, and that kind of thing. But yeah, the concept was there, and it was it was quite fun to work within those boundaries that they set.
Cool.
Yeah.
The analogy there just sparked. Sorry, Logan. The analogy just sparked the idea of like that, that cliche tattoo that somebody gets, and now they've broken up with that woman, and so now like a tattoo artist like does over it to make it like a better, or now it's something a cool flaming head or something like that. But you can still see like I love Sarah underneath or something like that.
And very faded ink, yeah. I'm curious what that development journey was like, obviously, because this is obviously your first time kind of being on the dev side of the game. And so I'm curious, especially from your side as kind of shepherd and kind of help overseeing the narrative and the story of the game, what did that kind of look like? How many kind of iterations did that take before you kind of came to where the game ends up in terms of its narrative and story?
Yeah, so it kind of started with like what I guess they call in the industry like a game design document, which is kind of like the Bible of the game. And it's probably something people learn about when they study at college or whatever, but it had a bunch of things within the world that were already there, including ideas for quests and ideas for boss fights and stuff like that. So I kind of approached it and worked with it as if that was going to be what happened. And interestingly, some of the stuff that I would work on and flesh out, that development is such a fluid process that, originally maybe the boss was going to be a giant, and then I write this cutscene or come up with some kind of like way for it to work. And then like, oh, actually we've changed that. Now it's going to be something else. And you're like, oh, okay, well, I have this great idea. How can I still make it work somewhere else in the game? So it was very much a process of adjusting to the game development, because that's what happens. And also like you come up with an idea and I might write in my script like I think that it would look like this, and then it comes back and it looks like the artist has done something that looks completely different, which might be really cool in another way, but it makes me go, okay, my original idea might not work, so I have to kind of adjust to that as well. So it's this process of back and forth, definitely. And because I'm an outsider to the studio, it's not like I'm going to like butt heads with any of them and be like, no, like this is my game now. I'm the captain now.
Yeah.
And I just feel so privileged to be brought in to work with such a talented team that, it was really just making sure that they were happy with anything significant that I was putting in there, suggesting to change, or creating new characters, or coming up, like I came up with an idea for a dungeon that doesn't have a boss fight and it has a different mechanic involved. So, really appreciate that they allowed some of my visions to come through in that as well. And I do have actually a Final Fantasy VI story to share as well. Ooh. Because I know Trevor has a lot of love for Kefka, and the villain of this game is kind of, at least in my head, it might not translate that way, but inspired by the I love in these old games when it's like an elusive villain that you don't know much about, and the Final Fantasy VII definitely has that with Sephiroth until like a certain point in the game where you learn a lot more about him. So it's the Man in Black, and I love those kind of classic villains, and I love Kefka, the way that he's introduced with this creepy laugh every time that he shows up. So that was something that I actually wanted in this game, was a creepy laugh, and I had that idea and even like started messing around with like the original audio of Kefka's laugh, and then I was like, no, it doesn't really work, and it's probably not even legal to like take a sound that's in another game and put it in your game. And the style, despite being like an 8 or 16-bit art style for Trigger Witch, all the audio sounds are like real sounds. So it's not like a MIDI or like formatted sound like you had in those old games. Anyway, ended up developing this like laugh for the villain that would take place when he shows up in the game, a few different points, and just messing around with that and trying to create like an evil laugh. That was the first sound that I made for the game, and from there I started to do more sounds for different things and ended up doing like all the sound effects and ambient noises for the entire game, which most of my work on writing was done like months and months, like a year ago, basically, apart from like rewrites and stuff. So it really gave me something to do to continue to help the game develop, because it took so much longer for the dev team to finish than I guess what they originally thought. And then compared to what my understanding of game development was, because everything just takes so long. But getting to do all the sounds and stuff was such a thrill, because you can, it could be a long time between cutscenes in the game, but there's always enemies exploding and birds chirping in the distance and cool stuff like that. So it all started with Kefka.
Excellent. It kind of leading into that a little bit, I guess. Obviously, you're in Australia. Rainbite being a small studio in New Zealand. I imagine the pandemic didn't probably really impact too much in the way of like the way you guys would have worked even in a non-pandemic situation. But like, was there any kind of impact, or would it have pretty much always been you working remotely and sending stuff to them and them kind of sending notes back and back and forth like that?
Yeah, I think they got off pretty well through that process because they were already working remotely, even compared to each other. Like, I think at one point in the last few years, one of them was in Japan and one of them was in Wellington, one of them was in Auckland. And that was just the way that they always worked because they're such a small team. They didn't have a shared space and they didn't need one either because they're all doing completely different things. So yeah, I would say that probably less than any other studio, they had, almost no effect from the pandemic that I'm aware of, at least.
There you go. Okay, well, yeah, next question. While there was no break in this podcast, folks, is I would say, what has working on Trigger Rich and kind of your first experience helping develop a story and a narrative for a game, what kind of lessons have you learned, both good and bad, maybe, in terms of taking that forward onto a future game or just a future write-in project outside of games even, that you would kind of use for the next project I'll take on?
Good question. I think what I've learnt the most about like the craft of it is about how writing a game is, at least in my perspective, is so much about making sense of the gameplay and the gameplay mechanics and trying to explain them so that they don't seem so gamey. For example, if there's a boss that, has a certain type of attack that the artist decided was going to be in the game, it's like, okay, doesn't really make sense in this world, but how can I make it make sense? And then like backtracking and maybe adding a line or something. Or you might go to like let's just say like there's an underwater fight. Okay, how can I survive underwater? How do I make that make sense in this world? So because it's a fantasy, like anything's kind of possible, but I just like to have everything make sense. In the same way that, a game like Returnal, it like explains the gamey mechanic of when you die, you start again. Like that's something that doesn't really make sense unless it's a Groundhog Day kind of situation. So I love that they did that in Returnal and in, Deathloop coming up, when you can apply like logic to a gameplay mechanic that we take for granted. The way that there's quick travel and there's checkpoints and all these things that make sense when you play games. But if you want like a narrative to feel like a more immersive experience, even though we're talking about a twin stick 16-bit shooter, I really enjoy that process. So that's something that I feel like I've picked up a few tricks on. As far as like the process of like collaboration and everything, it's been wild to just watch the guys fix the game because at certain points along the way there's different builds and there's art missing, or there's that section hasn't been done yet, and then once it's finally finished, it's about just trying to make sure that everything works, that everything's polished, and that just takes so much longer than I expected. Like I'm playing because it's being developed for Switch, Xbox, and PlayStation. Each of those platforms has different ways that the games save, and that's been like an interesting thing, that it creates an issue on this console but not that one. And then when there's an issue that can break the game, it has like so many flow-on issues to other parts. So there's been different builds that I've played where like it skips a cutscene, or it skips like I lose all my weapons or all my items and stuff, and it's like, how is it happening? It's happening because of this one thing that's different from the Switch, where everything works and there's no glitches or whatever it is. and I'm just like speaking in like general terms, not specifics, just as examples of things that can break.
Yeah.
But we're in the process now, like everything's been like approved from submission, but even that process of submitting it to PlayStation and submitting it to Nintendo, and like there's so many little things that they are checking for, and the way that like the trophies pop when you do X, Y, and Z, and there's just so much that can go wrong. And I've really gained a lot of respect. Like I was talking to Jared the other day, and I was just like, the fact that this game works at all is amazing. Like, how do games get made? It's like people are so harsh on games with bugs, and I get it. It's like frustrating as a consumer to pay money for something and then it doesn't work, and that can be the difference between like a great game and a good game, or a good game and a really bad game. And now I get it. Like I understand that I could never.
Minor miracle. Yeah.
It is a minor miracle. I could never get my head around programming, and some people can. That's good for them, but it's like you may as well, like if you ever watched that show like Blown Away, it's on Netflix. It's like a glass blowing contest where they're blowing glass and turning it into things. And I'm looking at it like, if you put me in that warehouse with all those tools and equipment for 1,000,000 years, I don't know if I would ever figure out how to do it, at least to that ability. And if you put me on like a desert island and said like, invent electricity, here's everything you need to do it, I would just be like, I guess I'm gonna be a caveman now, because I don't know how to do it. And it's the same with like programming. You could put me down in front of Unity or whatever and just be like, fix this glitch, and I'll just be like deleting random lines of code and hoping that it works. So yeah, I've got so much respect for programmers and for people that have to just make these things work, because if you've ever messed around in Unity, it's probably from what I've heard, like one of the easier engines to work in. But even still, it's just like it's another language to me, like literally.
Yeah, I did. I went to school. My first year, I was doing computer systems engineering, and very quickly learned I would rather play games than make games. So I bounced out. But like, I still have like bits of that like coding knowledge in the back of my mind somewhere. So like, I'll see something, I'll be like, oh, like this, like I can like identify what is probably like a root cause, like way back on something, or something, like how a piece of code has changed. But yeah, that can easily have a ripple effect. And I remember seeing that, like just making tic-tac-toe as a game in college or something like that. I was like, why is this so hard? This is a game that has existed for like decades at this point. Why can't I figure it out? So I can appreciate the seeing the other side of that, and that being like a mind-blowing or mind-expanding experience.
Absolutely.
Did you ever provide them with any kind of like audio files that somehow ended up breaking the game?
That's a great question.
I don't think. Oh, well, actually, I did notice, like in a build where sound, like the music would just cut out when I was killing enemies, and it was just a simple thing of like, when there's too many sounds happening at once, like there's only so many sounds that can happen at once. So it like overrides another one. So for example, if there's 20 enemies and I'm just blasting them all with my gun, with like a machine gun or something, either the sounds of the enemies will cut out, or the sound of the gun will cut out, which should be consistent, or the music will cut out. So they have to like set values as to like which is the most important. So obviously the music should be like the highest priority, and then like, the gun, and then the enemies. So yeah, there have been some audio things like that have, I wouldn't say broke the entire game or anything, but it's, yeah.
Yeah, the sound design is kind of the thing I'm curious about as well, like what that side of the dev journey kind of experience was for you. And because obviously you've written novels before, but you haven't obviously ever designed a like soundtrack to a game before. No. Outside of maybe like your university band playing days. So I'm curious kind of where you kind of even started on terms of trying to figure out the sound design for for a game like this.
Yeah, interestingly, they did have this sound library that they had subscribed to with like a whole bunch of bass sounds and Foley effects. And I guess they used that for their first game and had a lot of placeholder sounds. So I think I started with like, maybe I heard a sound and I thought, I could probably improve on that. And maybe it's like the sound of a flamethrower being reloaded or something. One of the things that I found was that you don't really want realistic sounds when they take a long time. So, for example, there's a revolver in the game, like a 6-shooter kind of cowboy style, whatever. I'm not really a gun guy, so I don't know the names. Beretta, I don't know. I have no idea. Colt. Anyway, and I wanted it to sound like when you reload it. I wanted the sound of think of like Metal Gear Solid with Revolver Ocelot, and you hear each of the bullets go into the chamber, spins the chamber.
Barrel.
What's
the barrel?
The barrel. Yeah, exactly. Gun guy over here. There's no
Australia
gun
known for its guns. Yes.
Yeah. Spin the barrel, and that's it. And the original sound that I made was like, I don't know, 3 or 4 seconds long, but you need it to be like 1 second max. So I like had to like, I wanted to still have that feel, but make it happen really quick. So instead of like having it happen like realistically, it was just like boom, done. And that was a lesson I learned along the way. Was just they have to be quick, or else it's like by the time, because you don't want the player to have to sit there and wait for the reload to take that long. They want to be like reloaded and then shooting straight away. So yeah, I guess just learning the difference between developing a sound for a game and just developing a sound was interesting. But as far as like the actual technical like side of it, it was just trial and error. Like I've got this Audio Technica mic in front of me, I got this room, and it was just like, okay, what sound can I make that would sound like a gun spinning through the air? Or what could I make that sounds like a portal to another dimension? And I got like a micro Korg keyboard over here, and there's like some sounds from that ended up in the game. And my son, Micah, actually is the sound of many of the enemies getting killed in the game, which is interesting as a player to be like playing through recently, and I'm shooting these little imp characters, and there's a lot of weird and wacky enemies, but one of the most consistent ones is the imps. And there's like an imp that's like a healer, there's an imp that shoots guns, there's an imp that casts magic, and they all are different sounds of my kid. I just hit record on my mic one day, and he was just like babbling when he was at a certain age. And I'd either pitch them up really high or pitch them down really low. And so people can kill my kid millions of times over in this game. It's a weird feeling, because you kind of feel bad when you do it, and it kind of adds to the experience, at least for me.
Well, it's now that's what I'm going to be thinking about if I sit down and play this one. I'm going to be like, I just murdered Jonah's kid. Oops.
Yeah, every death has a cost, It's like the Spec Ops: The Line.
You didn't even know the whole time too, and then all of a sudden,
yeah.
That's really funny. I like that. So I'm curious then, in terms of if you had a preference out of the audio or the narrative side of things, in terms of which one you found more enjoyable throughout the dev journey, and if you were surprised at how much you maybe enjoyed one versus the other, or if one was more difficult than you thought it would be versus the other, from when you first kind of started.
I think because it's so new to me, the audio was probably what I enjoyed the most, in the same way that, if you talk to a rapper or something that's been like in a movie, they just want to talk about like the movie that they got to do, or like they got to play like, in that Celebrity All-Star game, and they're like, they just want to talk about basketball because it's like new to them, and it's not like something that they do day in and day out. And because my professional career has been writing, mostly in like journalism and marketing and stuff, writing is something that is like second nature to me. And having written the books as well, putting so many hours into that, I definitely enjoy it, and I definitely enjoy seeing ideas turn into full concepts, and seeing those concepts string together into make like a narrative start to finish, and solving the problems of the story, and finding a way to tie off all the loose ends. So it's definitely an enjoyable experience, but just the novelty of sound design was so much fun. I might never get to do that again, because I know that
Sure.
writing is probably my main skill, and I really hope that I can write on another game, but I don't expect anyone will be like, do the sound for our game, because I think sound design is probably it's probably an easier thing that more people can do, because you can just literally go on the internet onto freesounds.org and just download like dinosaur shriek, and there it is. It's free. You can have it. So I feel like the reason that I got to do it was mostly because it saved that 3-person studio so much time, because I ended up putting so much into it that they wouldn't have been able to do it. And there's so many things that happen in the game that I was like, oh, there's an elevator over there, or a staircase. I'm going to make a sound so that when you run up the staircase, there's actually a sound. It's not just a transition to another room, which they probably would have been happy with that originally. But once you start making sounds for everything, it stands out a lot more when there's nothing suddenly. And the same with like ambient noises. There's so many cool locations in the game, from like swamps and a factory and a castle, like a haunted castle, and like an underground mine. And I just thought originally it was like, I wonder if we can make it so that when you shoot a gun in an underground mine, there's like reverb on the guns. And I think there is some of that in there. But eventually it was like, okay, now there's going to be like a little drip, like when you're underground and it's like really moist, and there's rumblings happening in the walls, and the sounds of like a bit of debris like falling to the ground. And then from there it's like, okay, there's a beach, so we're going to hear seagulls and we're going to hear waves. And it's they're little things that if people have the music to a certain volume, they might not even hear all that stuff. But if they do, it makes, I think, a really big difference to the immersion of the game. And also, like, the other thing I would say that I learnt is that there's probably so much stuff that goes into games that I don't even notice. Because sometimes you're playing a game, and like, how many times have you stopped and thought like, that pistol sounds really good, or like the reload is like a really satisfying sound. Like, you don't think about it, you just experience it, and it adds to it. It's the same as watching a movie. Like, you don't think like the Foley work is so good in this movie. You just think that that's what happens when someone opens the door. It makes that noise, but it's, I guess, not really like that.
Yeah, I remember like in especially when I was studying theater in college, realizing that if I was paying attention to like the lights of a show, it was either because they were doing something really cool and intentional, or because they were so off that it was like off-putting and standing out. If like the lights are just doing their job, and especially in like a contemporary kind of play where it's just, hey, the house looks like it has the lights on, like you just don't think about those things, and it is just adding to the thing. So the being noticed and standing out can sometimes be the worst thing that a designer actually wants to happen. And I definitely think about that every now and then now, either when I'm watching a show or a play, or when I'm playing a game, and I'm just like, oh yeah, I just like ran through this entire corridor that somebody designed, and like there were a whole bunch of elements and a whole bunch of work went put into this, and I was through it in 10 seconds and on to the next like part of this game. Oops. I hope they didn't like kill themselves over it too much.
And a great example when it comes to like detail, not that our game's anything like this, but The Last of Us Part 2 has, they've done an amazing job of their devs breaking down some of the facets of design that went into that. And one of my favorite ones is the characters breathing speeds up when they're like in a tense scenario. And it's a sound of them like trying to like hold their breath as there's an enemy come up to them, and like gasping for air once everyone's been wiped out of that conflict in that scenario. And that's something that most, like, I would say 95 or 99% of people wouldn't go like, did you notice the breathing in the game? But what you do notice is the tension, and you might not even be able to recognize why, but it's there. And I think that it's cool to be able to, you know, in sound design, I was able to kind of have some part in that experience that might not even be noticed, I think, which is cool, because it's like it's just made everything, I think, like that little bit better and more immersive.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and this is the new Last of Us Part 2 with Trigger Witch. I heard it here first.
Also, I was gonna say, like, if you really love me, you can play with the music turned on 0, so you can hear all my sound effects. But I can't even say that because the music's so good in the game that I could never recommend turning off the music.
I think the last thing I'll ask is your favorite, I think, either moment or memory or just kind of biggest thing you take away from the entirety of the experience of writing and designing the sound for Triggerwitch. Kind of what is the thing that stands out the most to you 2.5 weeks before the game comes out here?
Probably fresh in my mind because I recently played through the game, but especially the very last boss fight and everything, it was a sequence that I put a lot into and hadn't actually seen, because the first time I played through the entire game, none of the art was done for the last sequence. So seeing it come together with all the elements that I've mentioned and all the art and just nailing it, I just was so proud of that and experiencing it. And like, it's interpret this as you will, but there were moments when I was like playing through the game where I like laughed out loud, or I was just like, damn, that's good. Like, that's complimenting myself, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but that's how I felt. Like, as I was playing the game, I was able to just enjoy it as a player, it's a weird thing. Like, it sounds like I'm saying how good I am, because I did laugh out loud, and my wife was like, what are you laughing at? I was like, just my genius, you know, like, but you know, it is what it is. I had the natural reaction, and I can't deny that.
I think you kind of touched on this earlier, but I think something that may like impact that is you said kind of like you turned in the script a year ago, and then they've kind of continued to work on it. So like you haven't been living with it necessarily day in, day out kind of thing, apart from the rewrites and edits that you would send over. So it is like finding those things again for the first time. I remember, you know, taking playwriting classes and stuff in college, and like 3 years later going back through like the box or the file of those things and finding like a script that I'd written and being like, wow, this is like better than I thought it was probably at the time or something like that. So I can appreciate that.
And it goes beyond that, I think, even to, so it was a long time since I'd written it, but I've done so many like edits and like proofreading to check for grammar and stuff that I'm very familiar with it. But actually seeing it on the screen and a character saying the line, or there's like a sprite there, and getting the timing of it, so seeing it brought to life, you know, I guess it is like when there's a script read, like a table read for a comedy, and all the writers are sitting there and they're laughing because of the delivery, and it's just so cool to see it like come to life. It's not necessarily that I wrote such a, you know, hilarious interaction, but it's like just seeing it work, and you're like, yes, like I thought it was gonna be funny, and I think it's funny. So it was just very satisfying to see that work.
Very nice. Trevor, anything else from you?
No, we'd already kind of covered pretty much all the questions, the other questions I had in some of the other stuff. So
let's wrap it up then. All right, we made it to the end of the show. Congrats, you did it, guys. If you like what you heard, you can go check us out over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Like all of our wonderful patrons and supporters have, their support keeps the lights on over here and helps make shows like this and like that D+ show happen. Again, you can go over to patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Check out all the tiers, the goals, the gadgets, whatnots over there. You can also go over to youtube.com/thatnerdysite and check out all of the videos, let's plays, live streams, and video versions of every single podcast we do. We're all very proud of that and all the work that Trevor does on getting those uploaded. Otherwise, you can go support us by liking, subscribing, sharing with a friend, telling your grandma about us, giving us 5 stars on the iTunes, and everything else. You can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything that you want to plug, shout out, retweet, give some love to?
I mean, I'll give the plug to check out Trigger Witch at the end of this month. We didn't really dive into it, but I played the original Reverie and was a fan of like what the Rainbite team had kind of done with that one. Especially, like I remember that one was they were like one of the people that actually took Greg Miller, and I don't remember if Colin was still working with Kind of Funny at the time, but like they took up the idea of like, hey, they'll be consultants for the trophy guides and stuff like your trophy lists and stuff like that. And I remember playing through that and there being just a ton of like little in-jokes and nods coupled with like this very New Zealand centric story. And I thought it was just a cool little intro game. So I look forward to seeing what their latest endeavor brings.
Absolutely. You can go find me at Lefty Logie or Lefty Loggy, Loggy. Who gives a shit? I will also second that and give a shout out to Trigger Witch as well. Again, July 28th and 29th for that. In addition, I will be selfish and also give a shout out to something from that nerdy site because we are now 6 episodes into our Summer of Star Wars rewatch. And we just got done with the prequels. Episode 3 is live. Turns out it was pretty good, actually. And that was a lot of fun discussion. So go check out that as well. Otherwise, for Jono, you can go check him out at Jono himself, I believe, on Twitter. I think I crushed it and nailed it. Jono, what do you want to shout out? What do you want to plug? I'm not quite sure if you have anything.
I mean, apart from all my podcasts, putting in work, Comedy Rewind, Hoop Dreams, if you're a basketball fan, it's all there on the 8-bit website. But yeah, most of all, it's Trigger Witch, and you know, if you're not into twin stick shooters, maybe you've got a friend who is. It's kid friendly for the most part. You can turn off the blood. There's a pinata mode that turns all the blood into confetti and lollies or candy, I guess. So that's always there. You can play co-op, drop in and drop out at any time. So it's a great one for, you know, maybe you want to sit down with the missus or with one of the kids, you know, or the boyfriend or whatever it might be. So yeah, Trigger Witch, July 28, 29.
Fantastic. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site on all kinds of the social medias out there. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site, play your games and be good to each other.